Hey, what's going on, guys? So today I want to show you what is going to be my league starter for patch 3.17, which is going to be Scala Mages. So first I want to show you the example, which is going to be the Elder, because this build is extremely good at bossing, so I want to show you what it can do on a decent budget. Right now it is between 5 and 10 exalts budget. So the playstyle is going to be just placing your Scala Mages, which is my limit is currently 11, and then you're gonna place your Sniper Mark on boss, and then you can just run around. So it is extremely easy playstyle and very safe because you can just run around next to the boss. And as you can see, the boss is already dead. So now let me show you how the build performs in maps. So I would swap Volley with slower projectiles and Pierce with Hypothermia, and I'm gonna do a tier 16 beach map. So in terms of the playstyle in the maps, it pretty much behaves as a totem build, which means you would just spawn the skeletons and you wait for them to deal damage. So it's not the craziest clear speed, but it's still better compared to the skeleton mages. Again, this is mostly a bossing build, and it is just capable of clearing the tier 16 maps very early on. It's not gonna be the fastest at it, but it can still do it, and it's very good for static league mechanics like Blight or Harbinger, and it's even decent at Legion. So now let me show you damage on the map boss. So again, I would place Mark, Val, summon skeletons, and I just wait for boss to die. So DPS is obviously a bit slower than during the boss kill, because again I am using different gems. And for the defense, you have a pretty good amount of life, and you also are using the Bone Offering with Desecrate, with Trigger, so whenever you use any skills, Bone Offering is gonna be constantly applied to you, and you're gonna have very high block chance. So now before I move on to the PoB, I want to mention that the way you play this build is you are using the Skeleton Mages, and you are gonna be using the Dead Reckoning Jewel to convert these skeletons to Skeleton Mages. So before you have this jewel, you actually can't really play the build. And on top of that, when you're gonna be using this jewel, your Skeleton Mages are gonna be dealing fire, cold and lightning damage, which means that monsters are gonna have these resistances, and you are actually gonna deal very little damage to them if you're not gonna remove those resistances somehow. So the best way to do that is to use the Flesh Crafter. So this chest is removing a portion of monster's life and replace it with Energy Shield. And when minions have Energy Shield, their hits will ignore monster resistances. So I would not play this build before I get two of these items, so Dead Reckoning and Flesh Crafter. And because of this, you can't really start this build initially, so I will show you right now what you should do before you can swap to this version. So let's look at the PoB. So first I'm gonna talk about the leveling. So I would start as a Freezing Pulse. So you take that from the first quest when you enter the town, and you link it with Arcane Surge. After you do the quest at the Tidal Island and you finish the quest in Mudflats, you can take a Holy Flame Totem and you link it with Summon Phantasm, Frostblink for movements, for mobility, and Flame Wall to increase the damage of Holy Flame Totem. Then when you're gonna enter the prison, you will be able to take Combustion to link with Holy Flame Totem, and you can start using Summon Raging Spirit with Infernal Legion and minion damage. You might not have level 8 at that point, but you can still take this gem from town and you can equip them during the campaign. Preferably you would use the setup before fighting Brutus. After you kill Brutus, then you can replace your Frostblink with Flame Dash, and you can use Vitality if you have enough strength and you have a free red gem slot. Then in Act 2, you are gonna take Summon Skitterbots after you complete quest in Chamber of Sins, and you're gonna link it with Infernal Legion. And this is actually gonna give you a very nice clear. You no longer are gonna have to place your Holy Flame Totem and Summon Raging Spirit too many times to clear the monsters. The Summon Skitterbots are gonna do actually a very good job at clearing. Eventually, and for the tougher monsters, you are still gonna have to place the totem and summon Raging Spirits from time to time, but it's not gonna be needed that much. Then after you kill Weaver, you're gonna be able to buy melee physical damage, and you're gonna need level 18 to be able to equip it, and at that point you can start considering swapping to zombies and skeleton version of the build. So you would drop the Holy Flame Totem and Summon Raging Spirit, and you would just use Freeling summon zombies and Freeling summon skeletons. But preferably I would actually consider waiting with swapping to skeletons until you get a 4-link, so that would be summon skeletons, minion damage, melee fizz and minion speed. But you can still use Freeling zombies just for some additional passive damage. And eventually in Act 3, when you have 2 4-links, you can use this setup. So zombies with Feeding Frenzy and summon skeletons with minion speed. And eventually in Act 4, you can swap minion speed with multi-strike for the skeletons, and for the zombies I would swap probably Feeding Frenzy, because then you can also use a golem linked with the Feeding Frenzy. I actually forgot to put it here, I'm gonna do that later. So you would do something like this: summon Carrion Golem and Feeding Frenzy. Again, that's at the end of Act 4. And back in Act 3, when you're gonna kill Gravicious, you can get Raise Spectre at level 28, and then you're gonna go to Act 2, and in the old fields you can get the Carnage Chieftains as your Spectre, and this Spectre is gonna give you frenzy charges for your zombies and skeletons. Then after you complete library, or you are in Act 6, you can get your auras, so Pride and Defiance Banner, and at that point you might want to remove your Skitterbots if you don't have enough mana. So in the end game, when you're gonna have your 6-link, you're gonna use zombies and skeletons in the same setup, so both of them are gonna be 5-links. So you're gonna put Raise Zombies, Summon Skeletons, Multi-Strike, Brutality, melee fizz damage and minion damage in your tabula. You're gonna use Desecrate Bone Offering in Life Tap in your wand with Trigger Mod, which I'm gonna show in a second. Flame Dash and Shield Charge for movement. You don't really need Shield Charge, but I really like it. Convocation for summoning your minions to you. And during Cry you can use it on the left click for some additional regen. Assassin Mark for single target damage. Carrion Golem with Feeding Frenzy for the buff Feeding Frenzy, which gives you some additional damage, and Maim to increase melee damage of your minions. Raise Spectre. At that point, after Act 7, you will be able to go to Ashen Fields, and in Ashen Fields you can get both Carnage Chieftains and Host Chieftains. And if you are able to get 4 Spectres, you will take 2 of Carnage Chieftains and 2 of Host Chieftains to get power and frenzy charges for your minions. And you're gonna link it with minion life and mid shield for some additional defense for Spectres so that they don't die. And for your auras you can use Pride, Defiance Banner, Determination, and if you can fit it in your build you can also use Tempest Shield for some additional block chance. So I'm gonna talk about Scala Mages later. Now let's move on to V3. So you're gonna start with the left side, and you're gonna take, actually you don't need the life, you're gonna take the Lord of the Dead for some damage early on, and then you're gonna go to the left side for even more minion damage and minion life, because minion life is actually gonna also increase the damage of your Summon Raging Spirit with Infernal Legion, and it's gonna help with keeping your zombies alive later on. And that's why I am not using zombies early on, because they would just die too often. And when you're gonna get the lap, you're gonna take Mindless Aggression, and it is up to you if you take life nodes, so these 3 life nodes first, and then go to the top for the Death Attunement, or you just straight up ignore the life points first and then first go to for the Death Attunement and then life nodes. It's completely up to you. And this is gonna obviously help you with your raise zombies and skeletons, and you are gonna be able to summon 2 specters instead of 1 to help with generating frenzy charges. At level 46 you're gonna go to the left for some mana reservation to help with your auras, additional life and minion damage. And these 2 small nodes are actually decent. They provide 16% minion damage each, so they are actually worth taking. And then you're gonna go to the bottom, you're gonna take +2 level of minion skill gems from Cruel Lab and just take some additional minion damage and minion life. At that point your tree is pretty much completed, so until maps, and in maps you are just gonna take some life over here, life here, 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 and you can also take Corrupted Blood cannot be inflicted on you here, and you can remove it later if you get it somewhere else, maybe on a jewel. And speaking of jewels, you can take Ghastly Eye jewels pretty much everywhere you can, so over here, 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 and maybe even this one. And the jewel you would go for is just maximum life and minion damage when you summoned when you use a minion skill recently. So it counts when you summon the skeletons or when you use the Desecrate. Also you can take these nodes for some additional block chance. For the items, for the melee version, you would use Wand with +1 to all minion skill gems or +1 to spell skill gems. You have to remember that minion skill gems are only available, so this mod is only available on Convoking Wand, and +1 to spell skill gems is available on any wand. For the shield, and also by the way, the trigger is the veiled mod, so you have to unveil it using the Yun. Lion Eyes Remorse for the shield is just nice life, but unfortunately it reduces your movement speed by a bit, but it's very good amount of life and armor, so it's very good starter shield. For the helmet, you're gonna just use +2 to socketed minion gems, and you're gonna socket your specters in your helmet, and you're gonna craft +1 to zombie and skeletons. Chest, tabula rasa at the beginning. For the gauntlets, so gloves, just life, some additional resistances and minion damage crafted. For boots, Alberon's Warp Path for +1 number of skeletons. If you want to be faster, you don't really need the +1 to skeletons, so you can use just a rare pair of boots with 30% or 35% movement speed with some life and resistances if you want to. For amulet, +1 maximum number of skeletons, which is the Elder mod, And for the rings, there isn't really anything that great on the rings, so you can just get your life, resistances, and attributes on the rings. And you might have to use unset rings depending on what kind of gems you would want to use. I probably will have to use one unset ring. And for the belt, just letter belt again with some life and resistances. Again, the resistances and the attributes you can just have wherever you can. So amulet, ring, belt, gloves, helmet, wherever you can get them. For the flask, Rumi's concoction for additional block chance, instant life flask, quicksilver flask, basalt and granite. You can also use mana flask if you feel like you need it. You can remove granite. You can use silver flask for onslaught. There isn't really anything required for this build in terms of flask. You can use whatever you want. And again, for the jewels, just ghastly jewels with life and minion damage. Okay, so... Oh, and last thing I forgot is Ascendancy. So for Merciless, you would take Commander of Darkness, and last thing would be Mistress of Sacrifice. You can take it earlier, but I actually don't really like using offerings before I have my trigger wand. So usually I get my trigger wand around the time I get my Uber Lab, so it's perfect to start using offering at that point. And the offering you would use would be Bone Offering, so you would get additional block chance from it, so it would be this one. And again, thanks to the Ascendancy, you would get the block for yourself, then with Rumi's Concoction and some additional block chance on the tree, you can cap your block chance and almost cap your spell block chance. Okay, so now let's move on to the Skele Mages version of the tree. So again, for this version, you have to use the Dead Reckoning Jewel, and preferably you would want to use the Fleshcrafter chest. For the skill gems, you would remove zombies from your ceiling, and you would use Samoskeletons, and Val version of Samoskeletons is extremely useful. It lets you summon a ton of Samoskeletons from time to time, which is extremely good damage, especially for bosses. For the links, Spell Echo, minion damage, increased critical damage, and again you can swap these two gems depending if you are mapping or bossing. So Volley and Pierce for mapping, and Hypothermia and Slow Projectiles for bossing. In your wand you would use Desecrate, Bone Offering and Life Tap, and important thing is to put Desecrate higher than the Bone Offering, because that's the order in which trigger is gonna happen. So you want to spam Desecrate first and then Bone Offering to get your block chance. And you want Life Tap so that you don't have to use mana. The same thing for Sniper Mark, you can use Life Tap. You don't need it, but it is pretty useful. You can also link it with Convocation. For your utility minions, you can use Zombies and Specters with Minion Life and Elemental Army for some additional resistances for your minions, or you can link it with the Meat Shield. The -10 to elemental resistances doesn't really matter because you are penetrating all of them with the Fleshcrafter anyway. And again, for the Spectres you would use 2 Host Chieftains and 2 Carnage Chieftains, and it doesn't really matter if you are using the melee version of the build or Mage's version of the build, you're gonna use the same Spectres. For the Auras, you are gonna use Determination, Skitterbots, and Zealotry linked with Generosity. So this is the only one you would link with Generosity for some additional spell damage and crit chance for your minions. For movement, you're gonna use Flame Dash, and you can use Shield Charge with faster attacks if you want to. You don't really need it on bosses, but for mapping I think it's pretty nice. And you don't really need Carrion Golem for mages, so you would use Stone Golem at that point, and you can link it with Feeding Frenzy for Feeding Frenzy path. Okay, so that's it in terms of the skill gems. For the item first, you would still use the same wand. Eventually you can progress to one with some minion damage, or maybe +1 minion and +1 spell, which would be extremely expensive. For the shield, eventually you would want to swap your unique shield to a rare shield with Shaper mode, recover 5% life when you block, which is extremely good defense mechanic. Helmet, pretty much the same thing. You can obviously get better one with +3 to minion gems, but it doesn't matter that much. Chest, Fleshcrafter, and all of the other items are pretty much the same. The only different one is belt, which you would use Darkness Enthroned, which is the belt that lets you socket additional 2 Abyss jewels into it, so you would use 2 more Ghastly jewels. And the way you would progress this build would be actually with jewels. So you would get Quickening Covenant, which gives minions additional cast speed and chance to suppress spell damage. Fortress Covenant, which gives minions more damage and chance to block attacks and spells. And large and medium cluster jewels. So let's talk about these now on the tree. So for the large one, you would want Feasting Fiend and Renewal. Call to the Slaughter is optional. Probably to get one with all 3 of them would be pretty expensive, so you would have to settle on Feasting Fiends and Renewal. And the way to craft them, the easiest way to do it is to just use the Harvest craft, which is Reforge Live. For the medium one, the most important node is Blessed Rebirth, which will give your skeletons immunity to damage for 4 seconds after you summon them. And if you can, you also can get Renewal on medium jewel. For the Fortress Covenant and Quickening Covenant, you want to socket them in here, because this way the bottom line is removed, because there is no other notable passives in Radius, so the negative effect of these jewels is removed. And for the Dead Reckoning, this is the optimal spot to put it in, because there is 40 intelligence in Radius. And these are pretty much the only changes on the tree from the melee version to the skeleton mages. So that's gonna be pretty much it. Lastly, I want to talk about what are gonna be my plans. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna play with normal skeletons until I reach around level 60, and then I will do the Endless Heist strategy to farm some currency until I can buy Fleshcrafter and the Dead Reckoning. Depending on the prices, I might farm until I get 16 Fleshcrafter, or I might just settle on a 5-link, and then I will continue pushing the maps until eventually I can get all of the other jewels and all of the other items. And the minion builds are not that great at heisting, so I would probably somehow spec more into movement speed. I would probably not use Alberon's Warpath, probably something with more movement speed, and maybe some other things with movement speed. And I would focus on using Shield Charge with faster attacks to have increased mobility. So that's gonna be it for this video. Thanks for watching and see you next time.